Well, good evening, everybody. This is something new for us. We're trying a bunch of different technology. You know, this COVID-19 has us all working from home. And so we're literally at home. And so we've decided rather than be in the same room with our guest this evening, who we have a wonderful historian by the name of Mike Vance with us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mike Vance. But first of all, I want to say that today we're celebrating San Jacinto Day, which we celebrate every April 21st. In 1836, the Texian army met the Mexican forces at the grounds of the San Jacinto battleground. And for those of you that are Houstonians, you know on the east side of town, we have the big old San Jacinto monument. That's where the battle occurred. For you Texans, y'all all believe the Alamo was the big battle, but it's actually here just outside of the city of Houston in Harris County at the San Jacinto battlegrounds. So it's a big day of pride for Texans and particularly Tejanos, which are normally left out. And so today, we have a dear friend of mine by the name of Mike Vance. Mike's produced over 100 award-winning feature-length documentaries, short films, and television shows on a variety of Texas and Houston history stories. Mike is also the author of 6 books on sports, Houston history, and a combination of both. His most recent book is Mud and Money, a timeline of Houston history. He sometimes teaches local history at Rice University's Glasscock School of Continuing Studies and serves on the Harris County Historical Commission. But before I let Mike say a word, Andrea, te lo paso a ti.
Orlando, gracias. Pues feliz día de San Jacinto, que también estoy yo aprendiendo historia de Texas. Y pues la batalla de San Jacinto o la siesta de San Jacinto tuvo lugar el 21 de abril, una fecha súper especial, no solamente para Texas, sino también para mí, porque es el cumpleaños de mis hijos. Así que es un día súper importante para Texas y también para mí, para el mundo entero, porque nacieron mis hijos. Y bueno, 21 de abril de 1836, y fue un acontecimiento decisivo de la lucha de la independencia de Texas, Orlando, bajo el mando de Samuel Houston o Sam Houston. El ejército tejano pues sorprendió y diezmó en medio de una siesta que estaba tomando el ejército de México, y entonces pues ahí fue cuando surgió la batalla de San Jacinto, y por eso ahora Texas pues es independiente de México. Así que por eso estamos celebrando, porque ni siquiera COVID-19 nos impidió que pudiéramos celebrar la independencia de Texas.
Así es, Andrea, muchas gracias por ese comentario en español. Ahora vamos a introducir a nuestro gran amigo Mike Vance. Mike, welcome to the program. Say hi to everybody.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me, both of you. Thank you.
Well, we're delighted that you were able to join us. We appreciate you taking a few minutes out. I'm sure you're a very coveted man in Houston, Texas, so we're honored that you gave us a few minutes of your time. But before we get into the long, in-depth discussion of Texas history from your perspective, Mike, I want to tell everybody that's watching that we're really honored tonight that we have Marky Lee Riojas. For those of you that are from Houston, you know Marky Lee was formerly with the Hometown Boys, a great band here in Texas that's toured all over Texas, all over Mexico. He has a long storied career in the music industry here in Texas. And in fact, in 2003, Marky Lee was inducted into the Hall of Fame of Tejano Music Awards in San Antonio, Texas. And in 2011, he was inducted into the Tejano Roots Hall of Fame. In 2014, he was named the South Texas Vocalist of the Year. And so he has a great and storied history. And we have a little message before Marky Lee performs at the end of this program. By the time we finish interviewing Mike, Marky Lee is going to sing a few songs for you. But for now, he wants to say hi to you guys.
Thank you, Orlando, and thank you to the Texas Latino conservatives for highlighting the important role Mexicans and Tejanos played in the war for Texas independence. During this time of coronavirus pandemic, we all know more than ever and understand what freedom, liberty is all about. We all have a role to play in the fight in the war against the virus. If we all work together as a team, an army, whether it is in the front lines as a medical professional or staying at home, practicing safe social distancing guidelines, we will win this war and regain our God-given freedoms once again. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you. I'm honored to sing a few songs on this Tejano, Texas Independence Day. And I'm here at my house, my residence, and really, really miss everybody doing my performances. But we all have to obey the law and let's practice social distances and be with our family. Believe it or not, I'm having fun with my family more than ever. And we'll see you soon. Que Dios los bendiga a todos ustedes. And let's all do it together and fight this thing. And we'll see you soon. Gracias.
Ay, él es un hermoso, me encanta. Sabes que lo hice Google en YouTube porque me dijo, yo estuve hablando con él por teléfono antes de que hiciéramos esa transmisión y me dijo, pues búscame en YouTube y las canciones me encantan. No tiene canciones en inglés, tiene canciones en español, pero aparte son súper divertidas. De verdad que aparte él es encantadorcísimo y un honor poderlo tener con nosotros en este día festejando la independencia de Texas.
Pues qué bueno, Andrea. And also, I'm wearing my hat in honor of Tejanos and the Texians that fought for the freedom and independence of the state of the Republic of Texas. So, getting back to a little bit of history, Mike Vance, tell us a little bit about, you know, the focus tonight is ever since I was a little boy in school, I always heard about Sam Houston and Jim Bowie and, you know, all the legendary heroes of the Alamo, and we never heard about Tejanos and the Mexicans that lived here. Tell us what led up to this battle. Tell us what led up to the unhappiness among the Mexican community in Texas.
Well, the first thing and the most important thing to understand is that the Texas Revolution was not an ethnic conflict, not a racial conflict. It was a civil war in Mexico. And it all revolves around Antonio Lopez de Santana, the president of Mexico, who started out as a federalist. And Mexico, basically, there were federalists on one side and centralists on the other side. The centralists wanted a strong central government down in Mexico City. And these were people that had the backing of the military and the Catholic Church. They were the moneyed interests. The Federalists were actually, forget the labels of liberal and conservative at the time because they're very different than what we think of today. But the Federalists wanted more local control, and that was the people not only in Texas, but in a lot of the other provinces, and it all came down to money. They wanted to have control of their taxes and have some of that tax money remain locally rather than all go to Mexico City. So Santana started out as a Federalist, and the Federalists were loyal to the Mexican Constitution that was adopted in 1824, 3 years after they became independent from Spain. It was modeled after the United States Constitution. They had a guy named Ramos Arizpe that wrote the Constitution primarily, but he had input from a lot of other Mexican politicians, and they were really establishing a United States-style democratic republic. Santana followed the money, apparently, and switched sides. So about 1834, 1835, he switched over and became a centralist. And it's interesting because the people in Texas, the ones that had been here for a long time, the Americans in particular, that had moved over to Mexico, they had a great deal. They were getting almost free land and lots of it. So they really remained fairly loyal to Mexico. It was the ones that came a little bit later that were pushing for revolution, that never tried to learn the Spanish language, that never tried to really follow Mexican law. And it was the same issues for those Americans that the Tejanos that had been living here for many generations had. So you had a city, if you will, around San Antonio. We're still talking just a few thousand people. There was a community in Nacogdoches, and there were several Tejano settlements that were settled around Goliad and Victoria, Refugio, in that area. And everything else was spread out in ranches. And these people, they're like people today. Not all of them believed the same thing. Some of them were Federalists. There were some in particular around Goliad that really wanted to stay with the central government. But the ones that were Federalists, they were faced with a choice of going against their home country of Mexico and giving up things that they wanted, or siding with these Americans and possibly leaving their country of Mexico. So it was a very, very tough choice that they had, and a much tougher choice than those later American arrivals had.
Excellent. Can you tell us who were significant early players in the Texian army that were of Mexican descent? Because a lot of times we overlook those individuals. We know the names Navarro, we know the name Seguin, but tell us, a few more, and what roles those Mexicans played in the Battle of Independence for the state of Texas.
Well, Juan Seguin was the man. He was the guy. His father, Erasmo Seguin, was a major politician in San Antonio, and Juan was on that track. When in December of 1835, the Texians had come over and they had laid siege to the Alamo, which was manned by a group of those Mexican centralist soldiers. And Juan Seguin was involved in that. Ultimately, the Mexicans surrendered, headed back to Mexico, but then they came back in larger force. Seguin was involved in all of that. He was around at the Alamo. There were several people. The Alamo is an interesting place. We think of it today as just the church and the park grounds, but it extended in a larger footprint around downtown San Antonio there. And there were little houses in there. And some of the people that fought on both sides, both for the Mexican centralists and for the Texians, actually grew up inside the Alamo. They were part of the children of the military garrison, and they had lived right there. Juan Seguin was a little more well-to-do, I guess, if you want to use that word, but he became the leader of those Texian forces, the Tejano forces that were natives of San Antonio that joined with those Texians. Because he was both the leader and fluent in Spanish, he was sent out a lot of times with messages. They thought he could get through the lines better. It just so happened that he was out on one of those missions when the Alamo got attacked on March the 6th. So he wasn't there, but several of his fellow Bejarinos, the San Antonio natives, several of them were inside the Alamo and died there. There were others that joined with Seguin, and ultimately he ended up at San Jacinto leading that group of Tejanos at San Jacinto. There were other groups as well from the Victoria area in particular that were part of the Martin de Leon colony down there. Stephen Austin was not the only impresario in Texas that brought settlers in. Martin de Leon had brought in settlers from Mexico to settle around the Victoria area. He established the town of Victoria. He had 10 kids, thereabouts, 10, 11 kids, and a big extended family. So the family, the De Leon family, even though Martin de Leon was not around, but his family, his sons-in-law in particular, and his sons became involved in the Texas Revolution, and several of them were involved on the Texian side. Placido Benavides was probably top of the list. He led a lot of the local Victoria men, all Tejanos, down, and he was involved in fighting General Urrea, who was coming up the coast. And so instead of the Alamo track, where Santana brings people across from west to east, Urrea was coming up the coast, so from southwest to headed northeast. And the battles at Goliad and Victoria and Refugio, all around in there, there were a lot more Tejanos involved in that area as well. And Placido Benavides, much like Juan Seguin, ends up being kind of a tragic story later in Texas history.
So Mike, as the Mexican forces are coming up from the southeast, I'm assuming you said that there were these little constant battles as they made their way over to, as I understand, the Mexican forces were gathered around where the missions are today. And for those of you that have been to San Antonio, you could literally see the Alamo And I'm assuming back then, there was no downtown San Antonio. So you could probably get up to the Church Bell Tower and see the Alamo from where the Mexican forces were gathered. Is that true?
Yeah, there was a downtown San Antonio. San Fernando Cathedral was San Fernando Church, and that was the center of town. There was a big plaza there, just like there is today. And when Santana came back with all of his Mexican forces, and they didn't all arrive at once, they kind of strung into town over the course of days or even weeks. They were settled in the town. They had control of the town, and those Texian forces had retreated into the mission, which they had set up as a fort. They were building on what General Cos, what the Mexican centralist that got run out the previous December, had set up as a fort. So that was the best position for them to move into, and that's why they retreated into that Alamo.
Mike, I am Colombiana. I've been living in Texas for the last 23 years.
And she doesn't own boots.
You need to get some boots.
I do. And now, but I love Texas. And I think Texas is a very particular state along the whole United States. And it has an amazing history. And now I'm learning a lot. But what do you think we still conservative, and what it will still carry from that history that we have, or that Texas has, between Mexico and Texas?
And Mike, I think let me just clarify. I think when Andrea talks about conservative, we're talking about general Texas values. I don't think we're not talking about Republican, Democrat. For example, I had a dear friend who has passed away, former governor of Texas, Mike White, a Democrat. But no,
I'm talking about values.
Yes, truly conservative in values. So I think that was the gist of her question.
Well, let me approach it from a little different angle. The thing that makes Texas different, when you look, and as an aside, there's a term called Texceptionalism that historians and sociologists all debate whether that's really a thing or not. I think that we're not the only state that was a republic. There were a couple of others that had independent government before they joined the United States. But the melting pot, which is maybe not so melted as much as it is a stew with a lot of different parts into it, that we have in Texas is quite different than you find in any other state. Most of the United States, people around the world think that the United States is a former English colony. Texas was never a former English colony. Texas was a Spanish colony. And our laws, our heritage, our very culture all comes from Spain, not from England. Those were values, the English values were imported with those Americans that came later. But there is so much Spanish background in Texas today, and people don't seem to realize that and don't seem to appreciate that. So there are those values that came from Spain that have mingled with English and, in a lot of cases, French background. We had German immigrants that came in. So I think that we have always had a diversity in Texas, and I think that has informed our values that we have, and our independence, and our desire to not have people tell us what to do.
Yeah, that's you're from Cuba, but that's why you are the way you are.
Yeah,
because you grew up here in Texas.
Bossy, right? Yeah. No, I want to share with you that my heritage is that, and I learned this, by the way. I want to tell you guys that many years ago, I was sitting at home watching the local public broadcasting station, PBS, here in Houston, which is KUHT, and a show came on that was a documentary, and it was called The Birth of Texas. Now, many of you have not seen it, but if you've ever watched that show, you will get such a grasp about the richness and the history of Texas. And I appreciate that Mike talks about the values of Texas were not originally English values, but yet from the Spaniards and the French. And beyond that, I think, Mike, that the Spanish had tremendous influence on Mexico, and after their War of Independence with Spain, the Mexicans had tremendous influence in the state of Texas. Am I correct?
Absolutely. That Mexican War of Independence against Spain was devastating for Texas, which was not very well populated. The Spanish, for a long time, ignored Texas. They had sent out a couple of expeditions. They went back to Mexico City and they said, it's hot. There are poisonous snakes. There are poisonous lizards. During the wintertime, it gets freezing cold. Nobody in their right mind would want to live at that place. So the people that came to live in Texas were there as a buffer. After it wasn't until LaSalle landed and the French started showing an interest, it was like kids with a toy. You're ignoring one toy because it just doesn't interest you, but then the other kid in the room wants to play with that toy, and all of a sudden, hey, that's mine. And that's the way Spain was with Texas. So when the French showed up, all of a sudden the Spanish started establishing missions and presidios and little towns to support all of that. So Spain established everything. Mexico, when they fought Spain, that lasted for 11 years. And a lot of those Texans that were the Federalists later were the ones fighting the Spanish. And the Spanish army, which included, by the way, Santana as a young officer in the Spanish army, they came in and they ended up killing lots of those Tejanos, lots of those Texas settlers. So Mexico had a need to repopulate Texas. And that's really why the Americans first got invited back into Mexico, was because that War of Independence against Spain had decimated Texas.
And you know what is beautiful about this state? I mean, many things is beautiful, but even that, we are a melting pot, as Mike is saying, and we're coming from everywhere. We're just adopt the culture. We're just like, we start wearing boots and we start wearing hats and we just adopt the culture and everybody's very warm. And I love this state. I've been in another cities and another states in the United States, but Texas has something different. It's like something very special.
Yeah, not only is it special, it gets a Cuban guy like me eating jalapenos. Last night I was down in South Texas near in the Chihuahua Desert, and we had poppers for snacks before dinner. And it just converts everybody. We our Tex-Mex food, our jalapenos, we love put salt in our beer. We had just adopted a lot of the cultural things that were Mexican American and Mexican. But Mike, I want to talk to, it would not be fair, in my opinion, to talk about history and not talk about the disappointment that the Mexicans felt both in California and in Texas after the revolution here in Texas for Texas independence. I know that in California, some of the prominent families were promised all kinds of land, that they could keep their land. And same here in Texas. A lot of those Mexican families owned great amounts of real estate in Texas. But somehow or another, after the War of Independence, things didn't go quite so well for the Mexican families. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I had mentioned Once Again and Placido Benavides. Those are two of the really sad stories, but they illustrate the bigger picture. I mentioned a minute ago that the earlier that the people coming to the American people coming into Texas, into Mexican Texas, got here, the more accepting of Mexico they were. The ones that came later, much less so. And when the Texas Revolution broke out, when the leaders really decided we're going to fight for independence from Mexico, they sent out all these appeals to the United States. And these young men looking for adventure and looking for free land were coming over into Texas, into Mexican Texas, to fight. The Texas Revolution didn't last very long. So by the time they showed up, a lot of them didn't have anything to do. But they also had no background of understanding Tejanos, understanding that Mexican culture, and they wanted the land. And they're looking at those Tejanos that had been here for over 100 years, some of these families. They were looking at them as no different than the Mexican centralist soldiers that had been fighting. So they just couldn't tell the difference. They stole land. A lot of them were elected to powerful posts and used that power to steal land. Juan Seguin was the guy who went back to San Antonio after the Battle of San Jacinto, went back, gathered up the burned remains of the Alamo soldiers, and buried them and gave the eulogy in Spanish, by the way. Juan Seguin was elected to posts in San Antonio, was the mayor, and held other posts. And then in 1842, the Mexican government sent some troops back in. They had been, that civil war that we talked about had been going on for several years. They were in no position to mess with Texas, even though they said Texas still belongs to us. They hadn't sent troops back, but they did a couple of times in 1842. And it happened to coincide with a campaign of some of those newer American arrivals that wanted to get Seguin out of power. And ultimately, he had his life threatened, his family's lives threatened. He had to flee to his ranch, which was out near the present-day town of Seguin. And ultimately, he had to leave with those Mexican centralist soldiers, leave his homeland to go back to Mexico, where he was not from. He spent the rest of his life, he lived to be a very, very old guy. And he spent the rest of his life bouncing back and forth between San Antonio and Nuevo Laredo, where his son lived. Ultimately, he died in Nuevo Laredo. So he basically got dispossessed of his country and never really fully settled in one way or another. Placido Benavides, part of that larger De Leon family, his mother, or mother-in-law rather, ended up taking all of them ultimately after all of the slights and attacks against them. She ended up taking them to Louisiana. They lived in New Orleans for a while, and then in Opelousas for a while. For several years, Placido Benavides ended up dying in Opelousas. He never made it back to Texas. Some of his family did, led by his mother-in-law, Patricia de la Garza de Leon, and she ended up getting a good amount of the land back, but never close to the hundreds of thousands of acres that they had.
Mike, talk to us a little bit before we run out of time, and thank you for that background. But I think a very important person in the Declaration of Independence of Texas, signed as it was at Washington on the Brazos, was a gentleman by the name of Navarro. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Sure. Jose Antonio Navarro, another one of those longtime San Antonio natives, and a very, very important person in the Austin colony. He became friends with Stephen Austin pretty early on. And he was part of the state legislature. At first, those Federalists in Texas, the Tejanos, just wanted a separate state of Texas because we were combined with Coahuila. So Coahuila y Tejas. And they wanted Texas separate from that. But Navarro was part of that legislature, which met in Monclova or Saltillo, depending on the time. And he was the guy that really kind of did the bidding for Stephen Austin and for those American arrivals. They were dependent upon Navarro and a couple of other guys to carry their water politically, because they were the ones that had the connections in the Mexican government. And Navarro had been one of the ones that fought for independence against Spain. And for a while, he was exiled back to the United States and lived in Louisiana before he was able to come back to Texas. When the Republic of Texas came about, Navarro was elected to the Congress of the Republic of Texas, and more than anybody else really fought the battles for the Tejano people to retain their rights and try to retain their land. At times it was a losing battle, but he was the guy that stuck around and really fought for those Tejanos to not be completely disenfranchised by the American arrivals.
Mike, how many Mexicans signed the Declaration of Texas Independence?
3.
Okay. Andrea?
Well, my only thing to add is like, Mike, you think it's the education these days in Texas are being fair with the history and really teaching our kids the Texas history?
No. Having said that, I think it may be moving in a better direction. When I was a child growing up here in Orlando, probably the same thing. The Texas history that we were taught was one point of view. And the Tejanos were not included in that. African Americans were not included in that. For the most part, women were not included in that, with the exception maybe of Jane Long, who they had this mother of Texas story. Well, speaking of that, the best way to illustrate that, Stephen F. Austin is called the father of Texas. Well, he's the father of American Texas, but Texas was here for 100, 200 years before Stephen Austin showed up. So there's a lot of Texas history before he even arrives. And that was kind of the viewpoint that everybody had. Hopefully we will be learning more of our history, because through Texas history, you can learn American history. Through Texas history, you can learn world history, because nothing exists in a vacuum. It's all got to be in context. And we're a special place that we can learn all of those lessons with our local past.
Yeah, one of the things that I find interesting, that was a great question Andrea asked, because one of the folks that's watching us on Facebook happened to mention our dear friend Bill Fraser said that he caught glimpses of this in the 1960s when he was in public education. But I submit to you that the majority of Texas kids here in Houston, for example, 80% probably of the HISD population is Hispanic and mostly of Mexican descent. Mm-hmm. To me, it's a travesty that children aren't taught the real history of the Texas. And what I mean is everything. And so that lets these young children take pride in their state and know that their ancestors also participated in this battle of San Jacinto for the independence of Texas. I think it's significant, and it's certainly, I hope that some of our friends in the state legislature and the State Board of Education understand the significance of teaching all Americans history, whether they be the women or African Americans. I happen to hail from a little island off the coast of West Africa called the Canary Island, and the Canary Islanders played a significant role in Texas, I guess, Mike, in the 1600s. So I think it's important for people to understand the real history of Texas and not cut out a bunch of other ethnic groups. But speaking of that, because this is going to lead to the introduction of Marky Lee Riojas, who's going to sing a few songs for us here in just a few minutes. But Mike, give us a brief history of the genesis of Tejano music.
Well, before we do, I want to say one of my favorite things to say, and that is that people are not going to appreciate history unless they can see something that looks like them. So being able to address all of those Latino school kids, that's very important. They need to see their history in there. Same thing for African American kids, Asian American kids. It all matters, and they need to have something that they can relate back to their own community. So you're exactly right. Tejano music is, it's fascinating. And back to that melting pot or stew of all the different elements that came from around Europe for the most part, but and Africa as well. They're elements that all show up in Tejano music. The instrumentation of Tejano music is heavily German. They're adding an accordion and in early cases a tuba that provided the bass line, mixed with some of those Spanish music influences and even African enslaved people influences. So it's really got a lot of different origins, and that's why you see different styles. I mean, you see those polkas in Tejano music, and that's right out of Northern and Eastern Europe. That was all combined with those other elements here in Texas. And you see these wonderful, sad songs and ballads that are in there. So you get a little bit of everything. And it's all of those influences that made Texas show up in the music.
Definitely, and it's I found the Texas or Tejano music very similar in some ways to my music. Acordeón, te lo juro.
No.
Yes, we
Yo
have.
nunca he oído reggaetón en la música.
No, reggaeton is not.
She listens to reggaeton.
Reggaeton, yeah, but that's not a typical Colombian music. We have a lot, we have the vallenato, that we have el acordeón y la música muy parecida, nos encanta. Por eso yo creo que los tejanos y los latinos en general nos identificamos muchísimo, por eso es muy fácil acoplarse a la cultura tejana.
I'm sure you caught all that, Mike, but hey, Mike, it's a real pleasure to have you. Hopefully we'll get you back on. I think you're a fantastic documentarian, and you border on being an expert in history, and certainly Texas history and Houston history. And I've enjoyed our years of friendship. I hope that we can work on future projects together. I know we've got some things in the kettle, so to speak, cooking. And so we simply want to say thank you. I also want to give you a little credit because many years ago, you invited me to the Harris County Historical Society, and you were the genesis for the idea of putting a mural of Mexican American culture and history next to City Hall, which was a huge success. And I want to say thank you to you for being quite a visionary and giving some presence to the Mexican community here in Houston.
That was one of my prouder achievements. I really appreciate that. It's there in Sam Houston Park, although I would imagine that's locked up. You can't go look at it today. But nonetheless, it's a great 44-foot long mural. And it's the first time that those Mexican Americans, those Tejanos, local Houston Tejanos, have been honored in downtown Houston.
Well, thank you for your vision, Mike. Thank you for your time. We're going to let you get back to your family and to your pet and whatever it is that you do on San Jacinto Day.
And the parks are open now. The parks are open. People can go and visit the parks.
Well, excellent. So I'm going to go run my 6 miles when I finish here.
Now the San Jacinto Park and the Sam Houston Park, all the parks are open, and is what a timing. Today we're celebrating Texas independence, and also the parks are open finally. We're certain restrictions, but it's open.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you all for having me.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been enjoyable.
It was our pleasure. Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too.
All right. So now we've reached the point of our program in which we're really honored to introduce to you Marky Lee Riojas, who really needs no introduction. He is from Houston. He was part of the Hometown Boys, inducted into the Tejano Music Hall of Fame. I haven't had a chance to meet him yet, other than on screen.
Lovely.
But Andrea has had a chance to meet him. What was your impression of our local hero?
I never heard about him before. I start. I'm telling you, looking at the YouTube and Googling him, and then I met him. He's lovely. He is so down to earth. He's so much fun. And then listening to him singing, I was like, I feel in a concert. So if you're at home, just get ready, grab your drinks, happy hour, and start enjoying the music of Marky Lee Riojas, and dance. Grab your partner, your boyfriend, your wife, your husband, everybody, just start dancing or dance by yourself. But the music is amazing and so much fun. I enjoy it so much.
All right. Well, Andrea, thank you very much for all the production that you've helped us with. Thank you to all the behind-the-scenes folks that have made this program so far a huge success without too many technical glitches. Have a wonderful San Jacinto Day. Celebrate Texas independence. And let me introduce to you our hometown legend, Marky Lee Riojas. Take it away.
Vámonos.
Bueno, mi linda raza, Marky Lee, I'm going to do a couple of songs for you. But the first song that I'm going to do, it's a very, 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 very fantastic song. One of the greatest writers in Tejano music. Had the pleasure to work with him. They used to call him the accordion abuser. Mr. Joe Martinez from the Hometown Boys. Had the pleasure to work with him. And they were the only Tejano group that got inducted to the Hall of Fame, Buddy Holly Hall of Fame. and Lubbock, Texas. Esta selección para toda mi raza, que ya por título Dos Gatos. Take it away. Yeah. Hey, hope you're enjoying yourselves like me. There's no concerts, but we're having a concert right here tonight. Aquí en mi casita, feliz y contento, comiendo snacks cada rato, con mi linda raza. Thank you. Enjoy your music. Let's do one more song. One of the Latin roots, old songs, old school days. One of the biggest singers in Tejano music, Mr. Jimmy Edwards, just passed away about a month ago. Not from coronavirus. No, he had difficulties. Pero esta selección para todos ustedes, para todos mis tejanos y mexicanos, gocen de su vida ahorita ahí en esa casita, ¿ok? Vámonos, take it away, baby.
Dolor
old school song, Tejano Enamorado, para toda mi raza linda y chula. Thank you very much for letting us do this from a house. All the people stay at home, follow the rules. Y saludos de Asina, de codito. No se abracen, no se besen. Okay, a comer otra vez. We're going to do another song. This song is another legend that recorded the song. Allá del Valle, Manico Valle. Que Dios los bendiga a todos ustedes allá del Valle. Stay clean, stay safe. Let's do it together. We can beat this thing together, okay? Todos los tejanos, mexicanos, para toda mi raza de Monterrey que nos está escuchando, thank you. Orlando, hope you like it. Hope everybody likes it. All conservatives here tonight. Para todos ustedes. This song is recorded by Mr. Freddie Fender. Para todos ustedes. Dice. Wasted days and wasted nights. Whatever you behind. For you don't belong to me. My heart belongs to someone else. Why should I keep loving you when I know that you're not true? And what should I call your name when you're to blame for making me blue? Don't you remember the day that you went away and left me? I was so lonely, cried for you only, my love. Why should I keep loving you when I know that you're not true? And what should I call your name when you're to blame for making me blue? Hey! Oh yeah. Everybody grab your partner right now. Yeah. Don't you remember the day that you went away and left me? I was so lonely, cried for you only, my love. Why should I keep loving you when I know that you're not true? And what should I call your name when you're to blame for making me blue? Yeah. Wasted days and wasted nights. Don't waste these days. Don't waste these nights. Stay with a partner, with your family. This is a time we can all get together with our family and get to know us better. I'm knowing everybody better now. All my family, thank you. Gracias, Orlando. And don't forget, stay safe, be safe, stay home. And we're going to beat this thing together. Social distances, everybody. Okay? Gracias. Nos vemos a la otra. Thank you.